Hello strategy gaming enthusiasts, my name is AlzaboHD, and in today's challenge video, we are going to play Democracy 4 and transform the corporate states of America into a Marxist proletarian paradise. Democracy 4 is a strategic political simulator that allows you to play as a leader of one of 10 democratic nations, guide socioeconomic policy, and forge your own political path. Each of the 10 starting states are unique and face challenging starting situations, like Japan's debt crisis, Italy's massive mafia, or the US obesity epidemic, and are all aligned on a political compass, divided between socialism and capitalism on one axis and liberalism and conservatism on the other. Your actions as president or prime minister directly influence all aspects of your nation, but if you anger your constituents or make changes too quickly, you'll more than likely end up losing your re-election or getting assassinated, which will end your campaign. But before we get started on our communist campaign, this video is sponsored by Positech Games, the developers and creators of Democracy 4. To begin our campaign and make capitalism feel the burn, we'll start by selecting the United States and customizing the political landscape. By default, the US starts with a two-party system, and we can select fictional or real parties to both lead and oppose our administration. Naturally, the enemy of socialism is the Republican Party, and, in this timeline, the aging Democratic Party has collapsed. In its place, we will be playing as the Party for Socialism and Liberation, a real-life third party with only the highest marks. But there are simply too many red flags, so the Republicans will have to hoist the black flag before we start our campaign. In 2021, the US starts with medium to high GDP, health, education, unemployment, and crime, while having relatively low poverty. In order for us to unite the workers of the world, we'll first have to make policy changes to law and order, transport, foreign policy, welfare, the economy, taxation, and public services, which together form the 7 essential sectors that guide our government. At campaign start, we begin with the policies that the US has in real life, like privatized prisons, and we can see how each policy interacts with our population, economy, and various other factors. Green arrows denote positive correlations, and red denote negative correlations. So, for example, military spending increases technological growth, reduces unemployment, and upsets liberals, while pleasing state employees and patriots. Hovering over these policies will show all correlations, but changing, adopting, or canceling policies will require political capital, which is the principal currency used in-game. In effect, our political capital is increased each turn by the loyalty of our cabinet members, the popularity of our government, the dominance of our party in previous elections, and from emergency powers which can be enacted during disasters. The main way for us to accrue political power early on will be from our ministers, and, since many of them are loyal, will automatically grant us political power each turn. These ministers can of course be fired for a cost, or for free if their loyalty is low enough, but before you pull this trump card, you should know that this action will lower every other minister's loyalty and thus your overall political capital per turn. And speaking of political capital, it's time we use ours to defund the military and abandon our ridiculously expensive foreign policy. The road to socialism can take many different angles, and we will use our first quarter to abandon privatized prison in favor of community policing and subsidize our stockades. Crushing capitalism takes time, and with over 84% of our population subscribing to this view, many will be displeased by our actions, but so be it. Our core constituents, socialists, form only 15% of the American population, and we'll have to make subtle changes to convert our crony capitalists into proper proletarians without anyone noticing. Since we've cut our, quote, defense budget, unquote, we freed up the means of production to pursue social spending, and will use our political power to increase state funding to technology schools, subsidize the public broadcasting service, and ramp up federal science funding to offset research lost in dismantling the military-industrial complex. But someone has to pay for social services, and thus the capital gains tax rate is increased to fund the expansion of USPS. The effects of eliminating private prisons and defunding our armed forces have resulted in lowered GDP and prison overcrowding, and we need a solution. Our administration abolishes water cannons and tear gas, which conservatives hate, and their invisible hand forces us to appease them with the welfare fraud department policy. In an effort to turn our GDP frown upside down, we mandate a telecommuting policy to improve production and implement Labor Day as a federal holiday for all private and public employees. The good news is that prisons are no longer overcrowded, but women are still suffering sexual harassment at the hands of capitalist inequality. In an effort to right this wrong, our administration sets about subsidizing technology schools and abolishes selective schools entirely to foster socialist solidarity. But solidarity doesn't end with our own species, and in our quarterly report, we opt to implement regulations to curb factory farming. Of course, humans also deserve dignity, and our next project is to fund state housing and provide all low to middle income citizens stimulus checks via helicopter money, while raising taxes on capital gains to offset our spending deficit. With our GDP and popularity increasing and our poverty and deficit decreasing, the time has come to cut the military once again. This, of course, angers the capitalist class, who loves to profit off of death's destruction, but we are quick to appease them with mandatory Spanish language lessons and increases in our science funding to improve our popularity and maintain our technological advantage. But the polls are not looking good, and our ministers are openly disloyal, which will force us to fire our socialist tax minister and liberal welfare minister and replace them with capitalists to appease some of our more counter-revolutionary constituents. If we don't pass popular policies soon, we're going to lose the election, and, in our third quarter, we pass university grants for poorer families to win over the middle class. The effects are immediate and greatly increase our GDP, lower our unemployment, and our popularity surges from 30 to over 80% approval. Our priority is to build class consciousness, and thus we pass plastic taxes to fund subsidized school meals for poorer pupils, and pass free parenting classes for the proletarian masses. We ensure that everyone is able to benefit from their own concrete communist crib, and also subsidize the production of public libraries. One of our capitalist donors to our Communist Party suggests implementing a federal right to digital privacy, and we set out to finish Fox News by subsidizing socialist state programming. But in order to pay for the people's prosperity, we have to implement increases to property taxes and pass taxation policies on summer homes, ultimately allowing us to improve health standards for our food production. We're finally out of the jungle, but to truly set our sights upstin the air, we need to nationalize American Airlines, nationalize and secularize the YMCA, and force the proceeds of inheritance directly into the state. Capitalists hate this one little trick, and soon our credit rating is lowered, but our popularity remains high, and we're popular enough to enact meaningful change. In fact, we're so popular that we can hold off on passing policies for half a year to save up the political capital needed to extend our term limit from 2 to 3. Although this isn't inherently democratic, it has 100% support and is passed with thunderous applause. But we are nearing the election season, and it's time for us to make a pledge, but it isn't of allegiance to our flag. To appease liberals and socialists alike, we pledge to secularize our schools, and fulfill our promise within the same month by banning the Bible and promoting evolutionary theory in the classroom. It's the final countdown, and it's time to go to the polls. Despite half of our population not voting, as is American tradition, our Socialist Party won with a supermajority of 90%. In only 4 years, we've managed to reduce crime, carbon emissions, and our currency's strength, while increasing the nation's lifespan, health, gender equality, our environment, and much more. It's time now for round 2, Socialist Boogaloo. At the start of our second term, it's 2025, and all of our ministers are loyal, GDP is increasing, and funds stolen from the hugest corporate kleptocrat are returned to the people. It is said that God is dead, and it's time to separate church and state by promoting atheism in our school's curriculum. Perhaps, predictably, Al-Qaeda was not amused by this development, and forced their hand in a failed assassination attempt. We'll have to keep an eye on the intel page, but just to be safe, we will remove all mentions of God from our currency. The only way to enlighten the people is by increasing access to education, and in our case, this takes the form of tech grants. It also helps to continue defunding the military and deprogram our soldiers, though retired generals are quick to complain that imperialism is a form of economic altruism. It will be hard to change American culture, which traditionally consisted of eating detergent pods, but we're on the right track, as card-carrying members of the party are increasing every quarter. But corporations are not people, despite existing laws, and must be taxed into the ground. And speaking of ground, it's time for our vanguard to lay the iron path of progress by nationalizing all rail companies, and actually building American rail infrastructure, as Amtrak is far from adequate. Likewise, our politicians pass public land law regulations to allow revolutionary ramblers access to previously private land. Socialists now number almost 50% of the American population, and this is in part due to the generous social spending afforded by defunding the military. Conversely, capitalists, once 84% of the nation's population, now only number 53%, which is 53% we can't afford. You see, comrade, capitalism destroys the environment, and our solution is to tax gas, stop building ruinous roads, and forcibly reduce car ownership. This sustainable socialism leads to technological innovation, and we set about introducing airline taxes to combat climate change and fund our finances. We're only midway through our second term, and we've already reached an egalitarian society and balanced the budget, achieving the first American budget surplus since 2001. In keeping with communist tradition, we will use our popularity to push out term limits and devalue our democratic institutions. Capitalists also love autarky, and our credit rating is upgraded back to AAA. To round out the rest of our second term, we mandate that private and public universities are to be free of tuition, our surplus continues to grow larger, our economy continues to improve, and income inequality vanishes into history. Before the election, one of our campaign donors demands driverless cars in order to free the steering wheel from the oppressive commuter class. Religious schools are likewise torn down, while workers and union representatives are installed on all corporate boards of directors. It's not enough to remind the capitalists that they are killing the planet to chase profits, so we mandate a carbon awareness campaign to cut the effects of climate change while installing ridiculously expensive carbon capture devices. But to truly lead a people's revolution, you should consider meeting with the workers and eating lunch with them in a blue-collar cafe. With our appetite quenched and a rich meal eaten, it's 2029 and time for change. In true American fashion, hardly anyone bothered to vote, which is great as our Party for Socialism and Liberation took 83% of the ballot. For the first time in history since FDR, an American president is running for a third term, and human development, stability, and equality are rising, but a storm is brewing on the horizon. They say that third time's a charm, but it's also a time of trouble. Rising food prices are increasing poverty and crime, and unemployment is back on the menu. At least cars can drive themselves, and in an effort to drive our policies in the right direction, our administration starts off our third term by going beyond and subsidizing synthetic meat grants. Not only will this combat our food crisis, but it's also the key to finally solving obesity, while our driverless cars soon solve the problem of the gig economy. Our expansion of social services requires an equal expansion of taxation, and we set out to ban cigarettes completely, increase taxes on gas, and fully publicize all tax returns to combat rising levels of tax evasion. By this point, capitalists are capitulating, and our campaign donors are asking for the right to die so that they can leave our socialist paradise. This proletarian paradise is far from lost, and we impose a green electronics initiative to combat pollution and reverse our carbon footprint. Outside of our communist country, privatized space is booming as capitalists can only hope to gain capital where they won't be taxed. Yet. Meanwhile, all citizens are now fed not only on government cheese, but also on socialist Soylent soy green. It's what proletarians crave. In the face of such popular policies, the White House increases our term limit to 4 to thunderous applause. Wealth redistribution is our revolution, and luxury has no place and must be excised to ensure egalitarianism. At the dinner table, Soylent State Milk has at last solved the food crisis, and our party sets out a campaign pledge to defund the police, as our liberal society believes that all cops are baddies. We'll take away their submachine guns and give them more pacifistic pistols, and in terms of fiscal policy, we'll also mandate workers' dividends, which grants all of our socialist employees the right to take ownership of any remaining private enterprises. While McCarthy would surely be rolling in his grave, our communist constituents have never been more content, and the proletariat propels our political capital to over 40, which we can use to finally abolish all term limits. To perfectly balance our nation's diet, socialist soybeans are granted to all students for free in an effort to eliminate starvation and obesity. We also haven't forgotten Flint and set about solving the water crisis by nationalizing the industry and embracing Trotskyite tap water. But all democratic people's republics need bicycles and less vehicles, and our administration runs campaigns and subsidizes their development. We'll build an ecological and nationalized wall against capitalism and make the millionaires pay for it, but soon it's time to proletarian go to the polls. Never before has our vanguard party of socialism so clearly conquered the Republican Party, and, with over 95% of the vote, our communist countrymen look forward to ruling the realm without term limits. The next 2 terms, spanning 8 years, are pivotal in the development of our revolutionary republic. Welfare water has finally granted everyone humanity's most basic right for free, and we're set to secure socialism in one country. After over 12 years of our revolutionary rule, more than 82% of our population are socialists, less than 6% are religious, and only 17% of our initial capitalists remain to be tax harvested. From each according to their tax liability to each according to their crime, and our policies of proportionate fines finally eliminates tax evasion. And speaking of taxes, any remaining McMansions are sold off, traitorous day traders are forced to forfeit their fiat currency, and their carcinogenic cars are converted into bicycles with the introduction of car emission limits. But eating the rich doesn't quite scratch our itch, as they still consist of 3% of the national population. We'll have to destroy their gated communities and move them into our concrete cooperatives. The legal system, once a bastion of corporate and bourgeois inequality, will also have to be reformed, and we set about nationalizing all lawyers to offer all of our comrade citizens the very best of socialized legal services. Even if a criminal is convicted, our policies now ensure that citizens are rehabilitated instead of being punished, and to deter crime, facial recognition cameras are installed in every inch of every city and commune. Antisocial behavior is now a thing of history, and our budget surplus is approaching $80 billion per quarter. To improve the health of our people's population, we set about maxing out taxes on car ownership, overhauling socialized healthcare to include preventative measures, and force Taco Toll and other junk food brands to pay tribute. It's a time of healthy eating, voluntary organ harvesting, and at last, sensible telecom policies that result in nationalized America Online.
Our fourth term ends with the implementation of maternity leave, and after our president tells the proletariat to go to the polls, the Party of Socialism and Liberation secures an easy fifth term in office. Naturally, this results in more taxation, with of course representation, and soon sales taxes, packaging taxes, property taxes, and payroll taxes are marxed out. For the first time in American history, we have a quarterly budget surplus of over $220 billion, which can at last be spent on ensuring every citizen has a prefabricated communist complex, access to universal drug treatment facilities, and even socialized support for our subject spawnlings. These policies ensure positive GDP and health growth, which results in the eradication of pollution and the enrollment of nearly 300 million people into our Communist Party, forming more than half of the US population. This progress has resulted in top marks all around the board. To maintain our momentum, we put the nail in the coffin of private healthcare and increased taxation, which leads to the end of obesity, but the start of a bloated bureaucracy, brain drain, and a decrease in our GDP. Private education is up next on the communist cutting board, which also lowers our GDP and increases our unemployment. The conquered capitalists and befallen bourgeois are bayed into our national forests, granting this cruel class employment by forcing them to reforest the continent. This, naturally, leads to the end of our environmental protests, and soon, our administration is able to salvage the socialist economy by legalizing sex work, which recovers our GDP and marks an end to our respiratory disease. I am once again asking for your support, and it's beyond time to raise the minimum wage, so it's time to bring millions of our people out of poverty. After all, they're going to need a safety net, as post-scarcity socialism demands automation and communist contraptions that will ultimately replace our proletarian people. Our newly automated workforce naturally leads to Luddite riots, and to protect our RoboCop comrades, we'll need to pass gun control laws. In spite of these reactionary ragtag rebels, our re-election in the 20th year is all but a certainty, and the Communist Party appropriates over 440 million votes, or a 99% supermajority. The people have finally spoken, and it's beyond time to implement the final transitional phase between socialism and communism.
It is now 2041, and it's been 20 years since our party has first assumed power. Our massive budget surplus has been stockpiled for one reason, and now it's time to unleash the Yang Gang and universalize the means of income. UBI only costs $427 billion per quarter, or over $1.7 trillion per year, and with our last election polling our population at 517 million people, or almost twice our initial starting population, every communist citizen is now entitled to $3,285 per year for doing absolutely nothing. But capitalist creditors hate this one simple socialist trick, and, with a deficit of over $380 billion, we'll need to raise taxes to offset our utopian UBI. In socialist America, God is dead due to state secularity, but it's not too late for us to raise the corpse of Christianity and tax it to the max, squeezing over $74 billion from our monotheistic minority. Changes to tax law now ensure that individual inheritance falls to the state, private property and sales tax is taxed to the max, and the military is defunded to serve only a ceremonial role. For communism to truly work, we set about squeezing out any remaining capital from the rich, while also instituting a tax on cannabis and cryptocurrencies. Better slurp that dip, capitalist coin holder. While these taxes might seem extreme to anarcho-capitalists, the state and automated AI provides for everything our population could possibly need. Universalizing everything has led to a utopian union of socialist states, and contested elections are a thing of the past. Our sixth term concludes with over 99% of the popular vote and 80% turnout, relegating the Republican Party to the dustbin of history. Literally every single segment of society are card-carrying communists, and even the wealthy and capitalists are voting against their interests. It's time now for us to see what 24 years of socialism and liberalism have done to the USA. In 2045, the socialist states of America have an average GDP, perfect health, and perfect education on account of universal healthcare and free schooling. While some may point out our high unemployment as an issue, automated AI algorithms care for our every need. Violent crime no longer exists, and criminal activity is limited to internet fraud, while poverty is a thing of the past, as our people have universal basic income on top of drone-delivered helicopter money. In terms of democracy, over 99% of our over 550 million citizens intend to vote for the Party of Socialism and Liberation, and everyone loves our policies due to widespread equality, prosperity, and protection of nearly all personal freedoms. Our population consists of 90% liberals, 89% socialists, and 70% middle class, while capitalists, once over 84% of our nation, now form a tiny minority of 10%, the wealthy less than 5%, and religious citizenry almost wiped away, with only 3% of our people still believing in a god. It is both the best of times and the worst of times, with problems including internet crime, rampant brain drain, tax evasion, a bloated bureaucracy, an uncompetitive economy, a rare earth mineral crisis, Luddite riots over automation, and antibiotic-resistant bacteria. On the plus side, our socialist state has fully driverless cars, a completely egalitarian society where everyone is equal, a booming private space industry, and a technological advantage which combine to form fully automated luxury space communism. After 24 years of our party's policies, the changes to the United States are extreme. Notable contributions include a 77% increased lifespan, with US citizens now living to be over 140 years old on average. While hyperinflation is a problem, we've solved global warming by cutting CO emissions by nearly 70%, solved gender inequality, nationalized all private industries, and cut back crime, tobacco usage, and generational inequality by over 50%. Education and income equality are at an all-time high, while the average working week has been reduced to 20 hours for those who still choose to work. Global warming is a thing of the past, as we've managed to even lower the average national temperature, and nearly every positive metric has seen growth, while almost every negative metric has seen reductions, though our GDP has decreased by 2.4%. Over the course of our campaign, we've transformed our capitalist corporate state into an ecologically sustainable socialist paradise, and in the coming years, Mars is up next on our list of Marxist machinations. Before ending the video, I'd like to thank everyone for watching this far and supporting the YouTube algorithm. Consider supporting AlzaboHD in the polls by liking the video and subscribing to our party. A special thanks to Democracy 4 for sponsoring this video, and if you're interested in running for office yourself, be sure to check out the links in the description box below. If you're looking to contribute to our channel's campaign, you can also donate to our Patreon, buy games through our Nexus store, or donate basic attention tokens through the Brave browser. Thank you all again for coming to my TED Talk. It's time now to roll the credits.